They say a surefire way to examine if a culture is dying is to look at the creative arts. On this episode of Forge and Anvil, we will explore the question, is American pop culture dying, or are we about to experience a new renaissance in our lifetime? Also, can independent films be successful even if they are conservative or faith-based in nature? Welcome, everyone, to Forge and Anvil, where we hammer out uncomfortable conversations about culture, theology, and politics to sharpen ourselves for the race set before us. My name is Connor. I am host of this podcast. My regular co-host Michael could not be with us tonight, but I have three amazing guests to join me. The first of which is Brett Dasovic. So Brett, go ahead and tell the audience who you are and what you do.
Well, actually, first I'd like to thank you for getting my name right. That was incredible. Very rarely do they get the last name right. In fact, I was doing one last week, I sent a super chat to the guys over at Bounding Into Comics, and John at Bounding Into Comics, when he's reading my super chat, he goes, Brett, duh. Actually, I think I just call him Brett most of the time. So I want to thank you for that. But also, guys, yes, my name is Brett Dasovic. I am one of the hosts of Pop Culture Crisis. We are live Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. We talk about a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. Pop culture, how it relates into the current state of affairs in the world, movies, entertainment, television, all that stuff. It's a lot of fun. You should come hang out with us during the week.
Awesome. Well, glad to have you, Brett, and you are so welcome. Awesome. All right. Well, we also got another first-time guest, Christian Toto. So, Christian, go ahead and same task.
Yeah. I am the host of the Hollywood in Toto podcast. It loves free speech. It hates woke storytelling. And you know what? I hope some liberals join in as well, because it's not meant to be divisive. It is meant to celebrate what's going on in Hollywood, the good stuff, not the bad things that are happening, aka Disney. And I also run HollywoodInToto.com. It's my website. Created it in 2014. And again, it's the same mission. It's the right take on entertainment. But again, we stick to journalistic principles, not sharing rumors here and there. We just want to stick to the facts and hopefully make people understand that free speech matters, and it's sliding away. So be careful.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Christian. And we are also joined back again by Anastasia Hibbs. So Anastasia, say hello.
Well, hi, Anna Hibbs. You can just call me Anna. I consider myself at this point a Steve Deace Show contributor. I'm on twice, sometimes 2 to 3 times a week. You'll see me try to push his buttons, not only because that's my job, but because he's my dad. So I try my best. And yeah, I agree with everything that has been said so far.
Awesome. Well, welcome in. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, share it. It really does help us with the algorithm. So be sure to do your part. We would really appreciate it. As you can tell, I've also got a brand spanking new camera. So at long last, the potato cam is gone. So a much needed upgrade. Be sure to follow us on Twitter as well at Forge and A for additional content and updates on the show. Share this video and repost the stream on X, and join us Monday nights on a regular basis, because we always go live and we take your chats for free, but you just might get what you pay for. So anyways, we'll go ahead and dive straight into our conversation here. So as I mentioned at the opening, I wanted to go ahead and talk primarily about the state of American pop culture. And I wanted to actually use a Twitter thread by the Culture Tutor to kind of launch our discussion. And of course, it has to do with Lord of the Rings, because this is my show and I say so. So I have to inundate you with as much Tolkien as possible in one way or another. So This is from the Cultural Tutor. Why does the Lord of the Rings trilogy look so good? Many reasons, but here's one. Minas Tirith wasn't CGI. They built a miniature version of the whole city and filmed that. It looks realistic because it was real, and this wasn't even the biggest model they made. Peter Jackson, director of The Lord of the Rings, loves to use miniatures. What's a miniature? You build a model of what is impossible to build for real. They can be digitally enhanced, but miniatures give a texture and a sense of realism which CGI can't replicate on its own. This is one of the oldest techniques in filmmaking, going back well over a century. A famous example is the 1927 film Metropolis. Using foam, wood, polyester, and just about everything else, artists and designers use miniatures to bring fictional worlds to life. And so, Weta Workshop, a special effects and prop company led by Richard Taylor, were tasked with helping Jackson and the rest of the crew create the world of Middle-earth using miniatures. But there had never been a project of such complexity, detail, or scale before. Guided by artists Alan Lee and John Howe, renowned for their Tolkien illustrations, the team of Weta spent thousands of hours creating highly detailed miniatures. After filming, the footage was combined with shots involving the actors, thus creating places like Rivendell. Some of these miniatures were so large that Weta started calling them bigatures. Just look at the model for Isengard, which was over 20 meters across and included the dozens of underground mines and caverns seen in the film, plus hundreds of models of working machinery. Or Helm's Deep. The team would often create several different miniatures at different scales, some very small and others, frankly, colossal, depending on what sort of footage they needed and how it would be combined with shots involving the actors. The beauty of miniatures is also their greatest challenge. In order to convince the viewers that something 2 meters tall is actually 100 meters tall, the level of detail has to be incredibly high. Plus, it needs to be lit and filmed in exactly the right way. But it works. This isn't about CGI being bad or worse than miniatures. After all, The Lord of the Rings has plenty of CGI. It's about using both of them in the right way and playing to their strengths to create the best possible film. To create these models, they used many of the techniques and tricks that have been employed by sculptors and painters for centuries, not to mention the constant research into everything from botany to medieval weaponry to Romanesque architecture. Often, it was about keeping things simple and being clever, like using smoke and fairy lights to create the ethereal atmosphere of Lothlorien. They only had 8 trees, but they filmed them again and again, then combined the footage to create the impression of an endless forest. And all this effort was worthwhile. 20 years later, the Lord of the Rings trilogy hasn't just held up. It looks better than most films released this year. Miniatures are still being used, like here in Blade Runner 2049, but advanced in CGI have made them less common. People marvel at how realistic the Lord of the Rings trilogy feels. Well, most Middle-earth was physically real. And that's exactly what Jackson and Weta wanted to achieve. They said that they imagined themselves as historians and archaeologists rather than filmmakers. And that's only the miniatures or bigatures, to say nothing of full-scale sets built for Lord of the Rings, the groundbreaking CGI, the score, and so much else that went into making these films. Every minute of runtime represents thousands of hours of effort. It's tempting to look at the great art of the past and wonder why we can't make paintings and sculptures like that anymore. Well, maybe we're just looking in the wrong place. Maybe cinema is the definitive modern art form or equivalent of Renaissance painting. The team who crafted these miniatures are clearly among the most talented, hardworking, and passionate artists on Earth. And what they helped create is an international phenomenon beloved by millions of people around the world. If that isn't great art, then nothing is. All right, so I know obviously that was a long thread, but I think the whole thing was definitely well worth reading, and hopefully you guys are as pleased by that as I am. I'm getting my nerd itch scratched tonight. But anyways, I wanted to kind of bring that up to talk about how art is obviously something that, like I said, it's something that you can use as a sort of canon to check and see the health of a society and the health of a culture. And Lord of the Rings is something that, of course, stands the test of time. And there are many other movies that we can point to. But many people have been saying that so many of our modern day movies are beginning to get lazy. You'll notice the thumbnail, I actually used the one of the bigatures from Lord of the Rings on one side, and on the other side, it was comparing it to a full green screen of Legolas just in a sheer green screen background as everything's CGI'd in for the Hobbit trilogy that came out over a decade later. So I'm going to kind of use that to start our conversation, to ask the question, have we already peaked as a culture, and are we all just going downhill from here? Brett, I'll turn it over to you to get your initial reaction.
First thing I thought of was, look, there was one movie that I saw this year that I've recommended to everyone, and that's The Creator. And the reason that I recommended The Creator is that it was made on a budget of $80 million, but it looks like it costs about $250 to $300 million, because a lot of what they did in that film, it's a science fiction film, is done in camera, meaning that they weren't on massive studio green screen sets. They went out to physical locations and filmed them, and then put the post-production CGI in later, which is why they were able to make it feel more real. When the actors are reacting to something, they're actually reacting to something in the environment they're in. And seeing the stuff about miniatures is interesting, because I was actually just rewatching, we were talking about James Bond last week, and I was watching the DVD commentary for GoldenEye, and they talk about how post Brosnan Bond films, as it got to the last of them, that was when they first started really heavily implementing CGI for the movie Die Another Day, which was panned and atrocious because it was such a CGI puke fest that it looked awful compared to the beautiful miniatures that had been used to create scenes for that franchise before that. I don't know if that means we've peaked as a society. I think right now we're in a bit of a transition period as far as technology goes, and Marvel, as you saw, or if you're looking at Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit franchise, which obviously implemented way more CGI, way less focus on in-camera techniques, as well as actual modeled sets. I think we're figuring out what works and what doesn't. The problem is the financial aspect of it from the companies gets in the way. And when it's a company like Marvel, they want 6 versions of a scene. You can't do that with miniatures. One of the things they complained about with Victoria Alonso was that they would ask for 6 different versions of a single scene based on the green screen options that they had there. When you're doing it with miniatures, you can't really do that. You have to plan ahead of time, choose accordingly, and stick with what you got. Everything is so disposable now because it can all be swapped out for something else. They change these scenes half the time in post-production. So I think it speaks more to the disposability of the way we create things now than perhaps the end times.
Yeah. Well, Christian, feel free to jump in here with your reaction, and feel free to react to anything Brett said as well.
Yeah, I mean, interesting commentary for sure. I think it's always tricky to say, is this the moment where things are changing for the better or worse? When you're in that moment, you really need to step back to get the full picture. Having said that, there are a lot of warning signs you can see across the culture. And I think for me, it's more of a gut instinct where I love movies, but I almost love watching movies again, even more than the first time. There's something about that experience where I enjoyed it so much. I want to relive it. I want to experience it. I want to maybe drill down on certain themes. And I feel like fewer and fewer new movies give me that incentive to watch them again. And I don't think that's a good sign. I think what Brett said about the technology is fascinating, because it is a kind of a push and pull with CGI can do anything, but what if it's not the right answer? So I do think there's been a course correction there, a lot of re-emphasis on the practical effects, and that's a good thing. And again, CGI can do wonders. It can be, a great tool, but it's not the only tool in your toolkit. I just think, I cover woke a lot, and I think it's a term that's often exhausted, but I also think the focus on storytelling is being pushed aside for other factors. Diversity, we've got to represent certain themes, certain challenges, certain communities. And there's nothing wrong with any of that on paper, but I think the prime directive should always be tell a great story. And I think we're getting away from that. I think we're seeing at the MCU, obviously, and other stories, it just doesn't really grab you. And I think that goes back to the whole, I don't want to watch this movie again because the story doesn't fascinate me. So I think there are so many technological changes. I understand where Hollywood and storytelling is struggling right now, but I think the Northern Light should always be, hey, we've got to get you into the story, keep you there, and make that the focus. And if it happens to be diverse, then that's wonderful. So I just think we're losing that as the guiding light. And I think you can see it in what we see on the screen.
What was the most recent thing that you've watched, like new product that's come out that you rewatched?
Megan. I really enjoyed that
Really
film.
enjoyed Megan? Okay.
I enjoyed it the second time even more. Turned out the director of that movie did a movie that I loved from, I guess, maybe a decade ago called Housebound. It was a little indie horror comedy. Excellent. But that one really did seem to have a great horror comedy hybrid there. And it just was well put together. It was interesting and worked on a few levels. It was satirical. It was funny. It was creepy. But yeah, I go back to older films and, listen, a little bit of that is nostalgia. It's what I grew up with. I was, 20 when I first saw that movie.
Yeah.
I get it. I want to watch them with my kids again. But I just, I would point to maybe Joker and Jojo Rabbit as other quasi-recent films I'd love to watch again. But it just doesn't happen that often. And I'll watch the early Avengers movies on a loop, for crying out loud. And now I'm actually going to be seeing the Marvels very soon, and I'm dreading it. So,
yeah, we all are. We all are, my friend.
Yeah, I'd rather pee lightning. I think.
Another example is like, look, we reviewed Five Nights at Freddy's, which came out recently, and I didn't think much of the movie, but my favorite part of the whole film was the fact that they used actual animatronics from Jim Henson's Creature Shop to create the bears at Freddy Fazbear's. Just that little bit of extra mile, whereas most studios would go out of their way to jump a bunch of CGI muck onto the screen, made it more of a positive experience for me, even though I didn't think very highly of the storytelling.
Yeah. By the way, chat, sorry, I meant to welcome in the chat. I want to go ahead and just recognize BC's in here. He said PCC gang showing up to support Brett. Mossy is in the chat. Looking forward to this podcast. Shane H. Wilder said free chats. What is this? Commie-ish? What is this commie-ish? JK, just here to support my boy Brett, as always. Oh, and the best terrible movie is Terror Vision. Yeah, that was something I asked in the chat. Go ahead and comment on the show what the best terrible movie is, and I'll ask you guys that later on. And then Olivia Claire's also here. PCC, let's go. And BC said, shout out to Olivia Claire and her derby cat. And of course, Shara, one of our regulars, is always in the chat as well. Welcome in, Shara. Anyways, Anastasia, sorry about that. I want to go ahead and get you in on this as well. Your initial reaction to my long Twitter thread that I
no, you're good.
Made you guys sit through.
No, you're good. No, I think my initial reaction is it's a bigger conversation than technology that's being used, because I don't need to be older. I mean, I'm in my 20s now, and I don't need to be older to realize that quote unquote older movies do have some form of life lesson to them. Like even when my husband and I are expecting a baby, we even think back to the kids shows that we would watch and the lessons that we would learn from them rather than the pointless babble. And I think our world has a tendency to just want to push out information and push out random things. I mean, anybody can do this, anybody can do that. So I think the movie industry has a tendency to just regurgitate anything that they want to. Like, it's not as much of a thought out process, because it's also way easier to do things like that. Like, people can just make movies on their iPhones and publish them, and they can be just as good as some other technology movies as well. And so I think back, especially when Lord of the Rings was made, it's a more difficult process in the sense of it takes effort, it takes time. So I think it also depends on the person and the message as well. So I think it's a bigger conversation than just the technology, as well as the message that we're wanting to present as well.
Yeah, I think another thing to the point specifically about Lord of the Rings, and this is kind of true with trilogies in general. Back then, trilogies were risky. And when you actually look at some of those old interviews with like Peter Jackson, he was nervous. You know, they really had to have a successful home run with the Lord of the Rings trilogies, or else honestly, I don't know if they would have been able to make their money back. And that was a risky business back then. Not too many successful series were actually being put out, and nowadays it's like everything's being turned into a cinematic universe. And I mean, I was a huge Marvel fan. I was going to every single premiere. Honestly, part of that was I had a political awakening. That's a lot of what turned me off to Marvel. Once I realized how awful of a person Mark Ruffalo is. I'm sorry. I'm one of those guys that I take it personally when someone has the worst takes ever. I try to remove, person from art, but there's only so much you can do depending upon how bad I think the individual is. That's just me though. But I mean, nowadays, like to your point, Christian, like you could not pay me to go see the Marvels. I mean, that just sounds awful. I'd rather watch paint dry.
Yeah. And by the way, I understand your Mark Ruffalo allergy. I get it, and his takes are abysmal. But he made a movie, gosh, about a decade ago called Begin Again. It is one of the most captivating, one of the most enjoyable. It's quasi-romantic. It's got a lot of just tremendous music. Keira Knightley is the co-star. So as much as you hate Mark Ruffalo, you have to go see that movie. I always recommend it, called Begin Again. Perfect.
Yeah, you have to learn how to separate the art from artist. I guess maybe it's a little bit different when you do it for work, right? Like if it's part of your job, it's a lot easier to just swallow the pill and be like, look, I have to do this, and it's my job to be as objective as possible. But I've never had a problem looking at, maybe it's because I get lost in the moment. Like the best thing about cinema to me is that if it's done right, I get lost in what I'm watching. So if I'm watching a scene and an actor who has absolutely abysmal takes on Twitter does a good enough job to give me a performance that takes me out of my everyday life, which is what they're trying to do to begin with, might I add. Like that's the whole point, is they're trying to get you to get away from your everyday life and engross yourself in this story. If they do their job right, I can ignore just about anything. Like I can still watch any Kevin Spacey movie. I can still watch The Usual Suspects. I can still watch House of Cards, knowing what Kevin Spacey is accused of, or knowing what any of these celebrities have, done, knowing that how I connected to it. Now it can be a little bit different for some people, because I think that maybe they don't love it in the same way. They look at entertainment as just something to do on a Friday night, in which case it might not be as serious. But for somebody who, like, if you really, really love it, you kind of shortchange yourself by not allowing yourself to take the art in. A lot of the painters in the past were communists, and a lot of artists are going to have a lot of viewpoints that you disagree with. But I think we shortchange ourselves if we don't allow ourselves to take in the art and do at least our best to miss a little bit of what the artist says in their personal life.
I completely agree with Brett, with the one recent caveat. Watching Bill Cosby now, that's a bridge too far.
So I'm curious.
In every other way, 100% correct. But
I ruined it for somebody else recently because it was just before Halloween, and I pointed out, I was like, look, I love Scream 1 and 2. I love slasher movies. Harvey Weinstein produced all 3 of those movies. I'm still going to love those movies because when I watched them, they were at a formative time in my life, right? So I connect with me as a teen, as a 10 or 11-year-old watching those movies, not with the producer who at that time I had no idea was such a big part of the movie industry. So I feel like we definitely we lose out a little bit if we try to cap it just because we disagree with them. Obviously, Bill Cosby's a little bit different as well, because that's pretty fresh in everyone's brain, right? And everyone's got their line there, however they see it differently. But I understand.
So I'm curious.
I'm able to look past the artist for the art. I think I've lost my tolerance though for when I see, because I also think the term woke is overused, but when I see like woke things in movies, I've completely lost my tolerance for that. Yeah. Like Steven and I, my husband and I, will be watching a movie, and like we were watching, I don't even remember what it was, but we were watching a movie and it was so good. We were loving it. And then randomly this neighbor kid pulls up on his bike, and he's like, the guy's wife had died, and he was like, I just want you to know your wife was the only one who accepted me as the transgender student. And I was like, and it's done. And I'm turning it off because I'm like, my tolerance is gone, because that was so pointless. It's so dumb. That's what I can't do. That's the part that I can't. If I see like a gay couple in the wee back of the room, I'm like, whatever. But it's the random pointless. We have to shove this down your throats at any chance and any take we can. That's the part that I'll just straight up walk out.
I just watched a horror movie. It's called It's a Wonderful Knife. It's a spin on the Frank Capra story. Kind of a clever concept. I don't mind that at all. And what I'm about to describe didn't ruin the movie. The movie's weak in another area. But within the first 10 minutes, you had at least 1 to 2 interracial couples. You had at least 2 gay couples. You had a white grandfather with a black granddaughter. It was like boom, 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 right in a row. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I am so distracted by everything I'm seeing. And again, you can have all those things in a movie. There's nothing wrong with it. Representation's perfectly fine. But when it's crammed in there so obviously and so it's such an awkward fashion, I'm out. I get pulled out of the scene. And Anna, what you were saying was a man called Otto. Couldn't agree more. It stops the movie cold. And what's even worse about the moment is that trans character is interacting with Otto, played by Tom Hanks, who is this old school curmudgeon. He doesn't like the new ways. He doesn't like anything. And yet he's super sweet and warm to the trans kid in the neighborhood.
It doesn't
makes
fit.
no sense. Sorry.
It doesn't fit.
Naturally, got a virtue signal in there at some point. You mentioned Tom Hanks, and I was just thinking there's also some actors, I don't know if you guys struggle with this, but there are some actors where I only see them as the actor. I don't see them as the character. Like Nicolas Cage, I don't see him as the characters that he plays anymore. I just, that's a movie with the Nicolas Cage. In this movie, he's, his wife is dead and he's gone to prison. Like, just random things like that. Like there are certain people that I cannot remove who they are as a person from the roles that they're trying to play.
I actually can do that with Nicolas Cage. Like I just watched
Really?
Lord of War the other day. I love that movie, and that's nothing like half of his other work.
He's a hard one for me. He's a hard one for me.
See, that's me and like Keanu Reeves. Like he's such an awkward human being that when I've been forced as a wife to watch those god-awful movies and I see him try to speak his lines, but then he also speaks them as well in the interviews, it's the same. I just can't. That's me. I can't. I'm like sitting here like, this is extremely awkward.
Oh, man.
It is amazing that he is just a huge movie star who has endured since the 80s. But you're right. He's an awkward actor. He's an odd actor. He doesn't have great skill, but he's been able to transcend that. Also seems like a heck of a nice guy by every account possible. So God bless him, but not a great actor. Not a great actor.
Yeah, but that's for him. It's about picking the right roles, right? Like John Wick doesn't require him to extol a bunch of actual difficult lines or acting. I don't go to like if you're going to a John Wick movie to see great dialogue, that's your own fault. That's not his fault. You go to a John Wick movie to watch the action scenes that him and Chad Stahelski put together.
It does say something about him as a person and as an actor that you're right. He knows his limitations. He knows what he can and can't do. And a lot of the great actors over the years, the John Waynes of the world, it wasn't just that they had a niche, but they understood their strengths. And I think that powers a career for decades off.
Yeah. So let's go around the horn real quick because the chat's been going off on the best terrible movie. So Brett, what's your best terrible movie?
Oh gosh, that is a horrible question to ask me right now. First of all, I love a lot of really bad movies. I'm trying to think right now what would be a really good bad movie. Okay, so I grew up I've been skating for 25 years. There's a movie called Airborne that came out in 1993, which was a movie about a rollerblader from California who moves to Ohio. I wouldn't have called it a good movie, but I really, really love it. I'd have to think harder about like an actual bad movie that I love. Maybe Crossroads by Britney Spears with Britney Spears.
I've got a bunch, because Brett time to think, but the obvious ones are The Room and Troll 2. They are epic in how bad they are, but they're so earnest, they're lovable, which I think is appealing. But I like the really awful horror movies. There's one called, I think it's The Ice Cream Man. It's got a few fairly famous actors in it, and it's shockingly bad, but so bad it's enjoyable. Another one is Jack Frost, and it's not the one with Michael Keaton. It's a killer snowman story. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's just absurd. And then a final one, and I've really been enjoying watching these with my son because he enjoys the So Bad It's Wonderful. It's called The Sand, where these beachgoers are on a beach, but there's something beneath the sand, like some sort of creature that kind of comes up and gets them. So they're trying to stay, above the sand, away from it. It's terrible. And there's bad acting abounding. And I think Jamie Kennedy somehow, he must have lost a bet because he shows up there, but it's wonderful how bad it is. And I could watch it right now.
I also do love all the Fast and the Furious movies unapologetically. So maybe that's my answer is I will never apologize for loving the Fast and the Furious movies.
Nor should you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, I just love how absurd the buildup has been to that series. I mean, I remember when that series started off as a completely serious venture, and now here we are. They're like, what? They're in space now. Is that where they're at this point?
They went to space in 9. Yes, they did. And that to be fair, that was the least enjoyable of the franchise because it became too self-referential. But remember, the first one is just Point Break with cars. So that's the best part of it. Speaking of Keanu Reeves, it's just Point Break, but with cars rather than surfing.
That's fair. Olivia Claire also said that The Room is her best terrible movie, and Daniel Velez said that Troll 2 was his best terrible movie. BC said Reindeer Games. Mossy said Mac and Me.
Mac and Me.
And let me see. Shane H said he forgot about the double feature of Blackula and Blackula Scream. Shara Joel said Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was great. I quote that movie all the time. All right, so Anastasia, what's your best terrible
I know.
movie?
I've been like racking my brain trying to think, but maybe I'll just go with like the old Disney Channel fan of me, because that's what I grew up on, is the old Disney Channel. And maybe I'll go with Camp Rock, because I tried to watch, like, I was such a fan when I was younger, and then I tried to watch that, and it's so obvious that Demi Lovato is just like, for lack of a better term, cracked out of her mind after while she was acting. And I feel so bad. But even she has like posted on Instagram and been like, I was as high as a kite, and you can tell. So it's like, and I watch that, and it's just so uncomfortable. Like High School Musical, there's like a nostalgia where you're like, okay, this is kind of cute. But Camp Rock, I don't do that. I just sit there and I cringe.
Now I want to see that. I want to go look at his performance.
It is.
Is the idea of a bad movie that it's poorly made, or is it the idea that it's cheesy? Like I would need better, because I love the movie Rad, which was a BMX movie from 1986 that was fantastically cheesy and of its time, but I don't know if I would consider it bad, just very, very cheesy and dated.
Also, I'm not a huge fan of the Sharknado movies, because it feels like they're trying to be bad on purpose.
Yes, they are.
That's not how it works. You got to be really trying your best and have no talent, and then that comes out a bad movie. That's the joy of it to me.
I am waiting for them to mix that with the Meg. I'm waiting for the Sharknado Meg crossover that we've all been waiting for.
The Meg 2 has some, oh my gosh, it's so bad moments.
Yep.
Oh, a lot of them.
I can't even imagine. I didn't even see it. It just looked like that whole thing was going to be a bad, terrible movie. But
I also do love all of the Michael Bay Transformers movies. Again, unapologetically.
Hey, that would be on my list, except for I cut it off after 3.
Oh yeah, well, once they got rid of Shia LaBeouf, I checked out. I still watched them, but those first 3. You know, like they just replace. I love the fact that they got like a Victoria's Secret model for the third one that never acted again after that. She like married Jason Statham and never acted again, and that's fantastic. I love those movies also because, as I always point out, they're like this weird. We were in a time where there's just like unapologetic pro-American military propaganda. And I just I love that aspect of it, because Michael Bay was actually, you know, he's a pretty big fan of Americana. He talks about that in interviews and stuff like that. So in the age where movies take themselves as seriously as they do, which is very, very annoying to me, like I like the idea of movies when they didn't have to take themselves seriously all the time, but not in the Marvel way, in its own way, because the Marvel formula is very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if there is a formula anymore. I think it's just copy and paste. It's yeah. But what kind of projects are you guys most excited for? Let's kind of turn the page here and talk more about the future and what kind of things we can actually look forward to.
That's is there anything, Christian, you might be better at knowing what's on the horizon? Everything's been pushed back. Everything's been pushed back because of the strikes and everything like that. You could say the Daily Wire doing their Snow White project. I mean, I know a lot of people will be excited for that, and then the TV show adaptation that they're making. I'm excited because tomorrow the first trailer for Reacher season 2 is supposed to come out. And to the question we had earlier, like what was the last thing you rewatched? The last thing that I rewatched was all of season 1 of Reacher. I don't think I've rewatched of new things. Like I rewatch way more old media than I do new media. Most of the stuff that I enjoy is prior to 2012, 2015 at the latest. But Reacher did a really, really good job producing like an actual competent alpha male hero that doesn't have to be degraded by other characters and isn't played for laughs. So that is supposedly getting a trailer tomorrow. I'm actually looking forward to that.
See, I was going to give more of a... Oh, you go ahead. So sorry.
This is a question that stumps me. And there used to be certain projects. There was like the art house movies that I couldn't wait to see. And then the big glossy blockbusters I couldn't wait to see. but I'm mostly drawing a blank on both fronts. There's a
Dune?
movie called Poor Things with our friend Mark Ruffalo. It's got a lot of buzz, and that's got me curious. But there's also a film called, I think it's American Fiction with Jeffrey Wright, and it looks like a scathing expose on sort of white liberals who categorize Black people by just a very specific niche, and they only see them that way. And then this author comes around and basically exposes all of that. It looks interesting, so I'm curious about that. But boy, pop culture wise, I'm drawing a bit of a blank. I mean,
Dune?
I don't know. I mean, the franchises are mostly spent at this point.
Yeah.
The MCU's on life support. DC doesn't know what it wants to do. The writer's strike and the actor's strike are going to, strike down so many projects for the foreseeable future. I don't know. It kind of circles back to our discussion in the very beginning. I don't know whether I'm getting burned out as a film critic because I don't want to be that guy, or there's just not that many exciting things. I just binge watched all 9 seasons of The Office. And I'm almost in mourning right now because it's over. I literally just watched the final episode 2 days ago, and I thought, what a magical show, what a magical experience. And I don't know any comedy that could compete with that's coming out today or tomorrow.
Anastasia, what you were going to say earlier?
See, I wasn't going to give much of a specific response as I was going to give a more in general response, is that I'm really happy seeing, Christians, conservatives, just people who want better entertainment in general, noticing that sometimes we've made some of the worst and cringiest and cheesiest films of all time, and realizing, wow, people don't like them. They don't like when we make them. And so I think that we're seeing different people in different streaming companies starting to rise up and realize there is a lack of this and that needs to be filled. And so I'm really excited to see where places like the Daily Wire or like The Blaze go with that information, and just are starting to really truly realize we have a platform where we can actually, and we have the funds and the equipment, because we've reached a certain point where we can actually really branch out and do this. And it's difficult, especially I just think of the answer I'm the closest to, which would be my dad's with Nefarious, and just how difficult it was for him to want to get it in front of people, because people have such a hesitancy of wanting to even see a movie that could be titled as a, quote, Christian movie, because of just our history with just making some of the cheesiest and the stupidest movies in the whole entire world. Let's just be real. So
the term faith-based is used to push people away from the genre. Definitely. That's why they labeled
100%.
Sound of Freedom faith-based, even though it's not a faith-based movie in any
Not
way.
at all, no.
Not in any reasonable sense.
It's
by
meant
the way,
to other us.
Nefarious is a better movie than Exorcist Believer. So there you go.
Also, Paul Bois did Exemplum, which was very, very good, which I enjoyed heavily. And that's that's in an indie film that was shot on a minuscule budget of $9,000, and that would have had more rewatch value than almost everything that came out this year.
Yeah, actually, I think maybe the best comedy I've seen in a while was called Reopening. That was on Blaze. It was a movie that they bought. And it was about a theater company trying to start showing plays again during COVID. And it was such a brilliant satire of the overreach of that era, but it wasn't in your face. It was very smart, very funny, very beautifully put together. And again, why wasn't that in theaters? But the Blaze came along and said, yeah, we'll take it. So I agree with your point that the sort of the older Christian films, bad acting, bad production values, creaky, you name it. I think this whole space has really matured in a very quick fashion, and I think it's very exciting.
It's really interesting too, because I watch, like I said earlier, I watch a lot of old television prior to 2010, and there's still a baseline of religious value, there isn't as much weariness of God in those old storylines. I love old seasons of Walker, Texas Ranger. Yes, I do. As cheesy as that show is. But if you go back and you look at old shows from that time period, they didn't necessarily shy away from characters having religious beliefs. They just didn't make it the entire focus of the story, because that's where the faith-based films tend to go wrong. They might have the right idea on the outset, but the second it turns into their own version of the trans person who says to the guy that, oh, your wife was the only, whatever the line was. You're right. Like they have their own version of that, right? Where it's
For sure.
It leaves the realm of credibility. It leaves the realm of believability and enters into lecture territory, which the average person, if you are not, and I'm an agnostic, so like as somebody who doesn't have a problem watching, films that do have that. I loved Father Stu. I thought Father Stu was fantastic. With Mark Wahlberg and Mel Gibson 2 years ago. I thought that was great. But and I have no prejudice against religious or films that have religious themes, but you have to be careful and walk that line. And part of the job to do that is you have to get screenwriters who know where to pump the brakes, where to find the line and then pull back, because it's very easy as a writer, especially in today's day and age. And this could be a bit of projection, but I feel a lot of narcissism that comes from the writing today, meaning that they're writing what they want to say, not what the character inherently would say themselves.
Or they're writing themselves as the character.
Exactly. So there's a lot of self-inserts there. And so a good writer knows when enough is enough and when to pull it back for the sake of the story. And unfortunately, there's just such an influx of media that needs to be made now, because there's so many companies pumping out content endlessly that you just don't, they have to hire everyone they can. And a lot of those writers don't know when to pull back.
That's a great point, I think, but it's even broader. I think we're living in the age of narcissism, and I think it goes across the culture and touches many, many areas. But obviously, Hollywood Hollywood counts as well, and I think that does diminish what we're seeing on screen. It's a little bit like Joss Whedon. He's got talent and he's done some good work, but I often think a lot of the characters are just sort of that wiseacre voice that he had.
Yeah.
You just kind of deposit it in certain figures sometimes.
And that crosses across his shows too, right? So that writing tends to follow him, whether it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where it worked really, really well because it was new at the time, right? And the satirization of like those, there's a great Honest Trailers. I don't know if you guys ever watch Honest Trailers, but they did one for Buffy recently that talks about the satirization of that genre. And if you're looking for the strong female character role today and you're sick of the options you have, I do recommend go back and watching that show. It does get more, he does end up into almost parody territory the more he does, right? Joss Whedon does. But yeah, a lot of them, they're just writing themselves into these stories. And there's a difference between a writing style that people recognize or a production style that people recognize. That Taylor Sheridan is good at that, right? You know a Taylor Sheridan show when you see it, but that doesn't mean the characters aren't unique to themselves.
Yeah.
I think Taylor Sheridan's basically keeping TV alive at this point. His fingers are everywhere, and often the shows are quite good. And he really does respect the story above all, and lets that dictate his actions. It's
very much still a liberal. Like a lot of people say that the entertainment he's creating is conservative entertainment. It's not. At least I don't see it that way. I see it as storytelling that conservatives understand because it's willing to look at both sides equally. Both Mayor of Kingstown and Tulsa King did that very, very well. I wasn't a huge, like I liked 1883 more than Yellowstone. But his style of writing is very unique, and I think that they need more of people like him and less of people that are just willing to go out there and write what they know.
So, Brett, you mentioned a moment ago that you're agnostic. So I don't know what your full faith background is. And Christian, I'm not familiar with your faith background either, but I know Anastasia's been on this show a few times. I kind of know where she's coming from, and obviously her dad did make an independent film that was faith-based. And ultimately, like to your point that you mentioned a moment ago, Brett, and to Anastasia's point, Christian filmmakers have done a terrible job of making some of the most cheesiest. Like you need a lot of wine with that cheese. And it's unfortunate because, to your point, Brett, like God's Not Dead. I mean, the guys behind that, I mean, big hearts, amazing people. But, in the God's Not Dead movies, I think the only two atheists in the movie both end up dying by the end. One has cancer, one gets hit by a car. So it's just a horrible, I don't even think that they meant that. It's just it was like hindsight. They didn't even realize that they wrote in the only two non-believers ended up getting one cancer, one gets hit by a car, but ultimately the heart behind like a Christian creative, like Anastasia's dad, for example, would be ultimately to reach people like you, Brett, Ultimately the hope is that the story can be something that can move you to ask bigger questions that could potentially lead you to ultimately discover what we believe, which is that Christ is the savior of the world. So I'm curious, like, what was your thoughts on recent films? Like, have you seen like the Blind, Jesus Revelation, or Nefarious?
I saw Nefarious. I like Nefarious. It's funny. It's Sean Patrick Flannery's in that, right? But I was a big fan of Jordan Belfry, who's the other actor in there, who's he's a great, he's one of those actors. If you watch a lot of TV, he has had a guest starring role in just about everything you've ever seen. And I always love seeing actors like that show up in more prominent roles. I did like Nefarious, probably most the last 3/4 of the movie, like the last quarter of the movie, from the part where he's taken back to his cell and onward. I thought that was very, very well done. And the thing is it looks good, right? And back in the day, it was a lot different because there's so much infrastructure behind Hollywood that even at a medium budget, CGI notwithstanding, the project looks professional. It looks fantastic, from an untrained eye. And one of the things that a lot of the movies that were made either faith-based or just independent films with less actual infrastructure behind it is, like, when you watch something and you're used to seeing the Hollywood the sleek Hollywood look, right? You already have that working against you. So if you're trying to get something across to people and the production value isn't there to keep them engrossed in the story, then your story is going to have an even harder time getting through to people. And neither Exemplum nor Nefarious had that problem. They both did the most with what they had, and I thought it was fantastic.
So I know we're picking on a lot of Christian films, but also, I think we should all cut them some slack because they created their own genre out of nowhere. I mean, they didn't go to film school, most likely. They didn't get the support of studios. They just did it on their own, like a bunch of kids with the Super 8 camera going up and trying something new. So, I mean, yes, it was often terrible, but I just think they had to go through those phases to learn and grow. And what Brett's saying is so true, because the technology today, I have a buddy who just showed me a rough cut of his new film. It's coming out next year. It's called The Sasquatchologist. It looks great. It looks great. And it's a very good film. And I didn't see with all this sort of sound attached to it and all, but the fact that he can make that movie on a zero budget, essentially, and it looks rich, and there's drone shots, and the cinematography is beautiful on a dime. And that's an exciting thing to happen. And that's going to help the Blazes and the Daily Wires really enter the space with full force and say, hey, our movie looks as good as yours. Sorry, the way it's going to be.
I also have to add, too, I think that faith-based movies, we're at a different time period. We have to make different movies than we had to before. Yeah. Whereas I think we're in a different time, and we're living in a different world where evil is being perpetuated again and again and again and made to look better than what is good. And I'm not saying that wasn't happening before. I'm more so saying that that's happening more on a mainstream level as it's infiltrating more movies and more TV shows, to our point that we find ourselves going back to older movies. It's because it just had a mom and a dad who ate dinner together at the table. It's as simple as that. And nowadays you don't even see things like that as much. And so I think it's a different time period to make movies, because I mean, the same people who made God's Not Dead also made Nefarious as well. And so, and I think seeing not only their growth, but seeing them recognize we're in need for more movies like Nefarious, not only in production value, not only in trying to infiltrate more mainstream media, but also just the storyline and the just calling out what is evil as well. I think we're in a time period where that has become more necessary, but more Christians, their eyes are being open to the fact that has become more necessary.
Yeah. Aaron Wren, who's been on the show before, he talks about kind of the development as far as from a Christian viewpoint of how we used to kind of live in what he calls the positive world, where people used to view being a Christian in America, for example, as a net positive, like it was a net positive in politics, for example. And then he kind of talks about how we eventually slid into kind of the neutral world, which is kind of like the 90s, kind of that time frame, where things, slowly scandals in the White House, for example, that's one metric that he uses to measure it. They became less and less of a big deal when, when we learn about, at one point, presidents having an affair. I mean, it was like a political suicide, but then eventually it turned into kind of, oh yeah, politicians are sleazy. It's just kind of how it is. And eventually it gets to the point where, now we're in what you would call a negative world, where now it's no longer, not only is it not a net positive, but now it's kind of a loss if you identify openly as a Christian in areas of politics or career and things like that. And so, to your point, Anastasia, I think we need stories that can cut through the negative world and know what time it is, because we're not in a hunky-dory time frame where if we just kind of say the right message and we just kind of soften our blows, the certain way, we're going to reach people, in a positive way that's going to have any lasting impact. And
you don't, and to be fair, you don't always need a nefarious, like that just straight up just calls it out like it is and is scary. It is supposed to be scarier and is supposed to freak people out. Like we were mentioned Jesus Revolution earlier. Like I think a movie like that, which I would say is the complete opposite of my dad's movie, also does that, but in a different, more of wanting to gain an emotional response of, we're just going to put this out and it's kind of just telling the story. But like I found people like in the theater I was in just crying and finding an emotional response to it, because at the end of the day, we can all resonate to what things used to look like or what things used to be like in the positive, I guess you're kind of talking about as well.
Yeah. It'll be very hard to pull that back. Like, look, right now, one of the big reasons that is so difficult to do is you've got decades upon decades of neo-Marxism that has told you that Christianity and in any such branch of the Catholic Church, for instance, that they are part of the oppressor class, right? That's why they hold Christianity, Catholicism. It's why they hold that aspect of religion to a different standard than they hold Islam or Judaism, because there are religions you're allowed to criticize. One of the things we talked about today was a story about a singer named Sabrina Carpenter, who used to be a Disney kid, who released a music video that I personally didn't find. I didn't
How
find
funny.
it. And look at this. That's Olivia's.
Olivia
Yes.
Olivia Clare wrote it. Here, let me go ahead and just read it and give a little context here. Former Disney child actress Sabrina Carpenter released her music video for the song Feather on October 31st, displaying acts of violence and desecrating a Catholic altar. The video, directed by Mia Barnes, opened with Carpenter pulling up to a Catholic church in a pink hearse for the funerals of multiple men who had done her wrong. The video follows a montage of Carpenter and men who she portrays as being bothersome. The men fight over her in a gym scene where they stab one another until they are all on the ground. Carpenter is seen carefully maneuvering around the men in pink high feelings, not looking particularly bothered by what had occurred. The men are supposed to have wronged her, according to People. And let me see here. Another scene shows Carpenter dressed in a racy outfit dancing in a Catholic church at an altar. The scene also shows coffins next to her with flowers and crosses behind her, including a display that says RIP. Some fans praised Carpenter for the video, with one Rolling Stone writer saying, "She lets the universe take care of eradicating the posturing feminist men." However, church officials are criticizing leaders who let the pop star film the video inside the Blessed Virgin Mary Church in Brooklyn, New York. Bishop Robert Brennan said he was appalled, the New York Post reported. So there's a little bit of context for you, Brett, but I didn't mean to interrupt. I just thought that'd be helpful.
Well, it's funny because I have no idea. Look, it could be one of two things. It could have been that the studio that was producing the music video didn't completely release what they were going to film in there. It's also possible that whichever its diocese that read that script approved it without realizing what was actually going to happen. I think both are somewhat plausible. But the fact of the matter is, she would never film that video in a mosque. She wouldn't. And right. And you're allowed to criticize Catholicism and Christianity in America because Marxists have told you that they are part of the oppressor class, and therefore ends justify the means. You're allowed to criticize them, which is why you see so much of that these days. And you see very little, if any, pushback on any other religions, which fosters a sense of unrest from people, right? Because nobody wants to feel like that's why so many people have a problem with identity politics, right? Nobody wants to feel like some other group gets to have all of the safety, none of the, why are you allowed to criticize me and I'm not allowed to criticize you? Why isn't the playing field even? And there's a lot of decades of pushing for that in Hollywood that I think is going to be very, very difficult to undo.
Well, also, when you have an artist who mocks Christianity or does something like we're talking about, those are career boosters. That's a guarantee of positive press. That's a guarantee of accolades from your peers.
Negative world.
That's Rolling Stone magazine saying "attaboy, attagirl." That's what it creates. So if you're an artist and you want to rise up the pop culture ladder, why wouldn't you do that? That's your calling card. That's your ticket. So that's who you are as a culture.
It's also maybe the most offensive of that part of that whole thing is the idea that they talk about it as if it's somehow edgy, as if it's not the most
Right.
socially acceptable thing in Hollywood to dunk on Christians and Catholics. Like, you want to be edgy, diss Islam. You want to be edgy, try that. I'll believe it when I see it.
Wasn't it Norm Macdonald that was criticizing a stand-up comedian on, I don't remember what the show was, but it was some show where basically Norm Macdonald was a judge and he basically called him out like, "Oh, you thought it was so edgy to make fun of Christianity. How very original of you." And he kind of just made the guy look like a complete fool and that was, that was years ago.
Yeah.
I've also got to point out the double standard too. I mean, I can't imagine if a dude put out a video of a bunch of women murdering themselves and then him dancing on their graves. I just had to point that out as well. Especially as a woman, I thought it'd sound better if it came from me. So I've got you guys. I've got the act.
There's also somebody, I mean, when we talked about that, somebody made a fair point. Like, there's plenty of, maybe not within that genre, but there's plenty of rap music that will make similar, like, there are other aspects of pop culture that would go there, maybe not mainstream pop music, but also it's funny because she was part of the Disney Channel. So we watched a scene earlier where there's like a weirdly religious pro-God message on an old episode of Girl Meets World. It felt like a fever dream because it couldn't have been more than 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. But these days, like, that's the only type of, we talk about how male pop stars nowadays are not allowed to be the Justin Biebers of the world. They have to be gender ambiguous or sexually ambiguous. The female pop stars are allowed to talk about heterosexuality, but only in the context of dunking on men. Right. So it's never a positive message of heterosexuality. It's talking in some negative connotation. None of the entertainment, especially in music, is designed to foster any type of actual cohesive message between the sexes. It's designed to be inflammatory.
And by the way, this is maybe a tangent too far, but it was interesting that we did see a lot of actors sign those open letters about the Hamas atrocities in recent weeks. I feel like the music industry, the music world, was virtually silent. Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, you don't have to speak out in every cause and every
you should not.
But it just is amazing how few people did from that community.
No, I've been personally. It's been a joy to watch the few celebrities who do try to speak out get absolutely crushed because Hollywood is, for the first time in the last 20 years, has a narrative that it can't figure out, meaning that there isn't a bunch of white dudes to blame for everything. Therefore, they're coming headlong with the fact that the industry, which has pushed Marxist talking points, which means that Palestine is at essentially the top of the oppressed ladder right now, fighting with the people in Hollywood who are either, they come from Jewish families, they're of Jewish extraction, they practice the religion, and no matter how artful the response, no matter how fair they are to both sides, they get absolutely bodied in the comments because they don't have a single vision to coalesce around right now. I don't even know if I thought that would ever happen again in this lifetime. But the few that try to speak out all end up regretting it. Right now, today, it's like John Voight tells his daughter, Angelina Jolie, how stupid she is because of her position on Hamas. I'm like literally eating popcorn. I'm like, this is hilarious.
And by the way, the perfect personification of what you just said, Brett, is Ryan Long put out a video probably 3 weeks ago, right after this happened.
It's so good.
It was basically he was pretending to be an actor trying to do a virtue signal about the situation and being completely locked.
It's so good.
Like, oh, I should do this, but I'm this, and I can't even do it justice. It's amazing. So.
He goes, I'm the real victim here. As the actor, he goes, I'm the real victim here. I never miss a stance.
Yeah, sure. I think that's exactly the one that they're talking about. Ryan Long is a genius. He's a ray of sunshine in this dark time.
He is maybe one of the smartest comedians working today. He also, I mean, because it kind of goes along with his old bit that was like woke racist, and like they're almost identical. But he has this other really funny one where he goes like, I sell my footage to Fox and CNN. He's like, here's a footage of a bunch of protesters throwing bottles at cops. I obviously sell that to Fox. Here's the cops overreacting and beating the crap out of the protesters. I sell that to CNN. He's very smart. He's very, very smart.
He really
is. He does all that by staying above the fray, politically speaking. I don't know what his personal politics are, but he's aggressively apolitical. But that gives him the power to say what needs to be said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there is power in that. That's exactly how I would describe it. I want to go back to the Sabrina Carpenter thing, because something that I thought was kind of interesting, a different angle on the video is, in the video, she's clearly talking about these men. In the lyrics, she's talking about these men that are completely falling flat on a lot of them are basically not able to commit to her, and a lot of them are basically just, honestly, she just described very effeminate men as I guess how I would say the lyrics really portray. And so I just find it interesting in a way, because on one end you have her music video desecrating a Catholic church and being completely disrespectful, and to your point, she'd never do that in a mosque. But at the same time, the lyrics, she's complaining about these effeminate men that are not the type of men that are going to go up and ask a woman clear, communication out on a date, that are actually going to commit to showing up for the date on time, that are going to actually commit to doing things like communicating before and after and during the date of what kind of relationship they're going to have, doing like a define the relationship kind of moment. So I thought that was like an interesting bit as well, because there's kind of a critique on feminism, but I don't think that's how she meant it. But whether she realizes it or not, the things that she's complaining about all come from these effeminate men that have really been pushed to effeminacy by feminism itself.
Yeah. I feel like in those, like, there's so many examples of that in Hollywood where it's like they're this close to getting it, but she's never going to get it. She won't make the causal connection between those things. It also might be attributing a little bit more, like we might be overthinking it. Like a lot of this is pop ballads that are designed. They're basically written by algorithm now to just keep people consuming the most recent product. And right now in the music industry, the thing du jour for these artists is to talk about promiscuous behavior and dunking on men.
That's a fair point. Yeah. I find it interesting though, because it seems, Douglas Wilson, he's kind of been contributed as saying, what can't last won't. Okay. And it really feels like we're in a phase where what can't last won't, when it comes to like our gender roles, for example. I mean, you see a super strong, effeminate woman who's desecrating a church complaining about effeminate men. And it's just like the same, like you guys probably saw this story a little while back about this girl that wanted to date a conservative man because she wanted like the qualities of a conservative man, but she didn't want him to actually be like socially conservative. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that. That's I feel like Hollywood pushed that for a long time too. Like in Hollywood, like they have like this idea of like the acceptable Catholic or the acceptable Christian, the acceptable religious person, meaning that or like even how they see conservatives, right? Not even strictly religious, meaning that they're conservative except for they're very pro a bunch of liberal policies, which is how most of Hollywood is, right? There was an old episode of Blue Bloods, where in the show Tom Selleck plays a police commissioner, right? And he's they go to church. They're practicing Catholics. They go to church every Sunday. But then he ends up taking on this case that has to do with a woman who's a nun at the local parish, and basically they get into it about gay marriage. He says of all the causes, like of all the things to hold out on, why this? Now, as somebody who's agnostic and personally doesn't give a crap if you're gay or not, like at the time when I saw that, I thought that was a fair point. But the more that I've, gotten to know people of faith, people who are devoutly religious, I get their position. So he, as a character who believes in going to church every Sunday, as a pillar of his community and his church, they give you the California version of a Catholic, not necessarily the practicing version of a Catholic.
Right. They give you a caricature.
Yes, exactly.
It's a lot easier to make fun of a caricature than to actually humanize.
I don't even know if I'd call him a caricature. I would say that he's kind of like a hollowed out shell of what they imagine that character, what a person of faith is supposed to be, except for when the issue becomes uncomfortable and they need to fall back on what they know is acceptable practice in liberal society.
Yeah. No, it's very true. I mean, a Christian conservative person is allowed to play ball as long as they play by the rules that are set by the left and the narrative that is predominantly controlled by the left.
Yeah.
Well, going back to what you were saying about Sabrina Carpenter and everything, like I've been seeing this like trend take place where a lot of women are like, curse the men that fought for us so that we could have jobs because I wish I didn't have to work. Or they'll be like, or I'll see a lot of women like, unpopular opinion, I love being a stay-at-home mom. Like, that's not an unpopular opinion. That's what you were created to be. That's literally what you were created to do and be. And so I think that old saying, ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun, it's starting to come to fruition. It's everything you guys were begging for and asking for. Half the time, I feel like we weren't saying it because we didn't want you to not do what you wanted to do. It was because things were instituted and put in place so that you would be fulfilling the roles that we are naturally born with.
Yeah. And
so this honestly sinful or unnatural instinct of, well, I want to do this or I want to do that. And now it's coming to fruition. Now, okay, then go and do that. Go and be that. Go and say that. And now they're like, well, I wish that nobody had ever done this and I don't want to do it and blah, 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 blah. Like I think that kind of falls into your point of what you were talking about with Sabrina Carpenter, if we're going to analyze kind of what.
Also, there is an unpopular opinion on social media. The women will come for you. The feminists will come for you if you espouse any idea that says you love being a stay-at-home mom. They will immediately tell you how you're supposed to feel. You're being oppressed, and the patriarchy has come for you, and your internalized misogyny just prevents you from being able to see it. Right? There's a great Babylon Bee meme like 2 weeks ago that said like strong, independent career woman wishes she had a job that would allow her to do the things she likes, like staying home with her kids, baking, and doing and that's to the point, right? Like she's not able to do the things that she wants because the government needs everybody paying taxes doubly.
Yep, exactly. And that's unfortunately, I mean, you guys probably saw the video, and this is kind of what you were talking to, Anastasia, of the girl that was absolutely in tears. In fact, I think I have it here. Let me just play it real quick. Here it is. This one right here.
There's no way I'm.
Oh, there we go.
I know I'm probably just being so dramatic and annoying.
I think there's language warning.
This is my first job, like my first 9-to-5 job after college, and I'm in person, and I'm commuting in the city, and it takes me fucking forever to get there. There's no way I'm gonna be able to afford living in the city right now, so that's off the table. Like, fucking duh! If I was able to walk to work, and it'd be fine, but I'm not. So it literally takes me, like, I leave here, like, I get on the train at 7:30, and I don't get home till, like, 6:15 earliest, and then, like, I don't have time to do anything. I want to shower, eat my dinner, and go to sleep. I don't have time or energy to cook my dinner either. Like, I don't have energy to work out. Like, that's out the window. Like, I'm so upset. Oh my God. Nothing to do with my job at all, but just like the 9 to 5 schedule in general is crazy. Being in the office 9 to 5, like if it was remote, you get off at 5 and you're home and everything's fine. But like I'm not home. It takes me long to get home, and like people that drive to the office, like you don't get off at 5. And I know it could be worse. I know I could be working longer, but like I literally get off, it's pitch black. Like I don't have energy. How do you have friends? Like how do you have time to like meet like a guy? I don't know. Like how do you have time for like dating? Like I don't have time for anything, and I'm like so stressed out.
Someone marry that girl.
You finally got the equality that you begged for all those years, and you said you wanted.
Someone marry that girl up.
Yeah, like look, we covered that story, right? And my initial reaction was to dunk on her, right? But my friend Sarah on the show, she's like, look, it's her first full-time job. Give the lady a little bit of grace. She's clearly younger and she's not used to all of this yet.
Right.
It is kind of like a lot of what is happening is Gen Z figures out how the world works in real time on their phones, and then everybody dunks on them. It's like when they were talking about, they did a thing the other week. They're like, try to sign your name without pulling your pencil off the off the paper challenge, and somebody goes, "Bro, that's just cursive." Or they're like, look, we're doing a thing called silent walking, which is just walking without your phone, right? Like they're just figuring out how the world works and they're sharing it with the rest of us. The problem is our instincts as adults who have been alive longer, who may be a little bit more jaded, it's our natural instinct to dunk on them for that, right? But I don't know if necessarily what she's saying is an indictment of the culture we live in, right? Like I have long since hated the fact that I go to work when it's dark out and get home when it's dark out. But, it's almost like there's no, it's a little bit of humility on her part to share that story with people, and we can laugh at it, but that doesn't mean that what she's saying isn't necessarily true. It's just that it's easy to make fun of people when we think that they're the better example is the guy who's the person who worked at the Starbucks from like 2 years ago, who's like, I have to work all day today. Another person called in sick and I have to work 8 hours, and they complain about it. And it's a Starbucks video. That one was more in line to dunk on.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's emblematic of what we do to young people today. We coddle them, we protect them. You can't have challenging views because they'll scurry to their safe space. And they also don't realize that when you're 21 or 22, you take any job you can. You work your tail off. You hustle. You just swallow your pride. You've got 6 roommates. And then in 5 years, you have a better job and you have more money. And then you're down to 2 roommates. And then when you're 30, you've got a much better job than you've ever imagined. And you're heading to a wonderful career. But they don't seem to even acknowledge that that's a path they need to take. They don't understand that their dream job isn't handed to them, and that they actually might be commuting for part of their life. I mean, it struck me as sad more than anything else.
Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of in the same lane as you, Brett, in regards to how I feel about this girl. Like, I actually didn't even dunk on her initially, because immediately my first thought was, this poor girl just needs to find a man that wants her to be a stay-at-home wife, and she will probably flourish in that, because honestly, there's just a created order, and the reality is, like, I don't think that it's unbiblical for a woman to work outside of the home or anything like that, but I do think that the Bible does clearly point to the idea that the woman's first priority should be the home. Because there's something about that so many of these women that are like, that's why the whole trad wife trend caught on, is because so many of these women are naturally starting to actually feel like they're discovering it for the first time, how much they love just being homemakers. And it's not to say that every single woman needs to be a full-time homemaker by any means, but there is something to be said about the woman is naturally gifted to take care of a home, in a way where she finds that incredibly fulfilling, just like I find it fulfilling to work a hard day and to see the fruit of my labor. I mean, I did work a blue collar job where I worked to 60-hour weeks, and I wouldn't want to work 60-hour weeks, but it was so great that I did that for a season, because I can really relate to individuals who do that now, and there's something to be said about I still look back and I think I'm not working as hard as I did during that season. And because of that, I'm constantly grateful for the position that I'm in, that I have such a better work-life balance. But at the same time, there's even days as a man where I miss that. I miss feeling like I absolutely kicked my own butt by working my hands to the bone. And there's just something about the created order that I think that just speaks to, our differences.
She's also got like 2 decades worth of programming that tells her that the idea of raising a family and being a homemaker is oppressive, that she would have to then, I mean, I don't know the lady personally, but my guess is that she's probably got a whole lot of programming that's told her that that idea is oppressive and that's not what she wants. And it would take a lot of deprogramming for somebody to be able to go into that and not at least feel like they're doing something wrong, because society has been telling them for years that they don't need to, be homemakers. If you are going to have kids, you can be a CEO too, which, as we know, sure, it's possible, I guess, but they also forget that very few people ever make it to that position anyways. And it's like Ben Shapiro said, he's like, you're going to get a mid-level marketing job and you're going to be miserable because you're going to have to work 80 hours, 60 hours a week with kids. And it just makes everybody a little bit more depressed because we're fighting what people believe we were naturally inclined to do. Men be out there working and providing, and women at home caring for the families. That's a lot of decades of media and educational propaganda to just take out of people these days.
And she should also think about the politicians she votes for and how their economic policies are making her life even harder. But not sure
they don't do that either.
Mossy said, it seems like an age of discontentment. A little gratitude goes a long way. It's an age of entitlement, which is a great book that I highly recommend everyone read. That honestly speaks to a lot of these issues. Then Shane Wilder in the chat said, spot on with the Catholic caricature, Brett. Also, the Sabrina stans came after Olivia for the article, like the Olivia Rodrigo stans did to Mary.
Oh, yes. Well, they take there's nothing scarier than a pop artist's like hardcore fan base. The last people in the world you want to piss off are BTS stans or Taylor Swift fans. They're the last people. Like, if you, my claim is this, like, look, if you ever get abducted in a car, somebody throws you in the trunk of a car and you can't get out, just insult a BTS stan and they will find you and release your location no matter where you are.
Awesome. That's a prime formula to get doxxed.
It's a great life hack.
Yeah, you heard it here, folks. Survival training on Forge and Anvil with Brett Dasovic. Rhaegar Targaryen says, Brett Targaryen. Oh, there we go. Didn't show his full name for me. Brett cracking up. He said, as promised, I am here. Welcome in. We appreciate it. Shara said, welcome to the real world. Life is going to suck for the next 40 years.
Look, and the thing is, that is absolutely true. But I just also think that it's one of those things where we have found ourselves in a society because of the internet where our instinct is then to hit them with the, toughen up, better figure it out for yourself. You don't win fans. You don't influence people positively that way. And even if 40 years down the line they eventually come to that conclusion, that's 40 years in which they were not necessarily seeing your side of things because they just dismissed you because you were rude to them. It's just I feel like we give up a lot of chance to find common ground in search of the best dunk on a person these days.
Well, I think a big point too is she says later in one of her comments, in all reality, I think her parents failed her. They obviously didn't take the time to prepare her for real life. I think that's extremely valid because we're growing up in a world of iPad kids. And so I think it's one of those things where like parents are like, we were walking in the parking lot the other day of the grocery store as this kid was like 8,000 light years away from his mom, and she was walking clear ahead of him, and he's just on his iPad watching videos and doing all that stuff. Like, so many parents are allowing the internet to raise their children. Now, some just may not realize it, but others are just letting that kind of precious time go. So I think that's also a fair point too, that I think in a sense, your parents do fail you if they don't prepare you for the real world and what it has to take and what it has to offer at the same time.
Yeah. Rhaegar said, dude, if I made a video like that, even at her age, my dad would have laughed in my face. So that kind of reinforces your point. And to what you said too, Brett, I mean, it's like, it's kind of like the sort of the boomer stereotype to be the ones, you know, back in my day, I walked to school both ways, uphill in the snow. But something that we have to keep in mind too, is it's like, you know, we have to face the reality if you're in the older generation. And we did an awesome video on our channel. In fact, right now it's the main video when you click on our channel on generational tension. And I had a boomer, Gen X, I represented millennials and Zoomers, all in the conversation, just talking about where all our generations went wrong, how we relate to one another, how we can have better, how we can broker a peace between the generations. And I highly recommend watching that. But one of the things that I really think that the older generations need to understand, especially like the boomers, is that, the reality is economic policies are making life harder for millennials and Gen Z. I mean, even with like interest rates, people are, oh, you're complaining about a 7% interest rate. Back in my day, it was 10. It's like, yeah, for a couple of years on a $50,000 home. Like it's not the same thing.
Stop drinking Starbucks and you'll be able to afford a house in no time. That's what they're saying. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the boomer that we had on there is C.R. Wiley, and honestly, he's one of the good boomers, I would say. And I'm not trying to dunk on boomers. I'm just saying he's very self-aware of where the boomer generation went wrong, because you can definitely put a lot of blame on the boomers. There's a lot of blame on all of us, though. So I highly recommend watching that entire episode, because there's a lot to be learned there. But
I also want to point out, like he said, like my dad would have laughed at me if I had made a video like that. It's that this is going to sound sexist, but it's women and men are different, right? And women are more likely to make a video like that, you know, complaining about because a guy knows that nobody's going to care. Like if a guy makes a video like that, he is like, I wonder now, I probably would have dunked on the dude if it was a guy, right? Because men and women are different, and you're going to have different expectations for the standards about what is considered hard work, about what is considered complaining. And maybe you just give more leeway to a woman in that situation, because 50 years ago or 60 years ago, they wouldn't have been expected to do something like that. I think that just fundamentally, it ignores the fact that we're not the same.
And father-son dynamic is going to be probably a lot different than father-daughter. But I mean, Anastasia, you can talk more to that than obviously we can.
I mean, I've got Steve Deace as a dad, so he'd totally laugh in my face if I made that video, if any of you know anything about him. But no, and it really comes down to your parental unit as well, because my dad likes to tell the story that him and I were at the mall and these teenagers were just acting like absolute donkeys. And I looked up at him, and I was a little bit younger, I was probably like 11, and I'm like, why do they act like that? And he's like, because I'm not their dad. I said, am I gonna act like that ever? And he goes, no, because I'm your dad. And so, and yes, he was joking around with me, but I think in a semi point, that's a fair point as well. As just going back to what she said, it's really just about your parental unit and how involved you are with, and it comes down to everything nowadays, especially like you see more parents getting involved in their child's education and everything else, like wanting to go to school board meetings, wanting to see what's going on. Like it's not like this stuff hasn't always been going on. It's just more parents are starting to peer under the curtain and take more of an action towards it. And so it's really about my dad would have laughed in my face. Maybe your dad wouldn't have laughed in your face. Maybe he would have handled it differently. But I think it really comes down to who is your parent, and will they engage?
You mean domestic terrorists, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, DOJ. Rhaegar said she is right. He would do that, knowing Steve.
And I full-heartedly believe that my dad would have done the same thing to me, but like I don't have any sisters, so I don't know how my dad would have reacted had he had daughters, right? It could have been different, but I just feel like maybe my perspective has changed on some of these videos, and maybe this is just that one golden example, but I see a lot of kids figuring out how the world works and then sharing it in their youth, in their youthful mind, sharing it with the world for clicks and likes on the internet. And my critical side wants to dunk on them for it. My more giving side says, like, they're Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they're going to figure out the world in their own way.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, we would have pushed back on our parents for having the same critiques of us when we were younger. Sure, it would have happened in a different way. It might have been with your friends at a party on a Friday night, but it's not like, at least for me, I didn't grow up and immediately identify with my parents' view of the world. It took a long time before I got there. It certainly wasn't, and it took longer than my early 20s to figure out why my parents were the way they were. And I think that maybe we just forget to give the kids a little bit of grace, and they're going to figure it out as they go.
I think building on what Brett said, I think if we all suppressed our first hot take and really gave it some thought, I think everything would be better.
Yeah.
And I think it's really about, too, like, what your parents are instilling in you. Because, like, also to Brett's point, like, it took me a bit to also really understand the gravity of things that my dad would say, or the advice that he would give me, or both my parents would give me. But it's the idea that parents need to instill those things in their children now, so that once they come to those points, and then once they start asking those questions of themselves, they then can go and relate back to those things. I am only 22, so I'm just way smarter than everybody else.
Exactly. And what that's actually a really good part, because, like, one of the things that I would get into arguments with people about is, like, look, what's the point of arguing with someone who's not willing to listen to you? And I think one of the things that they don't realize is, like, the idea isn't necessarily to change a person's mind right then and there. The idea is, to your point, to put the idea there so that sometime later, when their defenses aren't as hardened to what you're saying, and some other incident in their life gives them pause, perhaps they will think back on that conversation you had, and hopefully that leads them to discovering something about themselves to be true that they might not have known beforehand.
Yeah.
It's like planting the seed.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that generation conversation, C.R. Wiley talked a lot about the idea of gravitas, and he talked a lot about the idea of painting a picture, and he was referring a lot towards dating relationships, and how we need to kind of recapture. Actually, Jeff was saying that as well. The Gen Xer I had on that, he was talking about we need to recover aesthetics. And the reality is we need to recover aesthetics about proper parenthood, about proper relationships, both male to female, intergenerational. And a lot of that comes through the stories that we consume. To kind of loop our conversation back to the beginning, we need to be telling better stories. We need to be having these stories with strong father figures, and we need to be having stories with women that aren't all just a bunch of Mary Sues, and we need to make sure that what South Park was able to take 1 billion shots at doesn't remain our reality when it comes to our pop culture.
Maybe even the sad thing is maybe even more simple than that. Like, think about just the last time I was trying to think of a movie, and maybe Christian can help me with this. So I was trying to think of a movie with a romance story that was not cynical or comedy driven. So not a romantic comedy. And I was trying to explain to someone, we were talking about why Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning didn't do as well as Top Gun Maverick, even though theoretically they should have been on the same trajectory, same star, same director, same studio, same everything, right? And I was thinking back to when that movie ended, and Tom Cruise, he gets the girl and he drives off into the sun. He rides off into the sunset on his motorcycle. I couldn't think of the last time I just saw a positive example of a couple who fell in love. And it's not like this is some traditional story where they met in their 20s, they got married, they had 2 kids and rode off in the sunset. He's now older, and she's got a child, and yet he still finds his way to love by the end of the story. And I can't remember the last time I even saw something as simple as that done well in a movie.
Gosh, that's hard. The movie I mentioned, Begin Again, has an element of that because it's not a comedy. It's got it's music driven, but Hollywood has almost given up on the rom-com. We've seen a couple of recent examples where they're flirting with it again, but just simple romance can be complicated. And I think it shouldn't be complicated. I mean, I think
gender role and the way they approach and the way that they've complicated gender roles in Hollywood, which is why this year you got what was it, bottoms, and you got bros, right? Those were the big ones this year. But I can't remember the last. I was watching that movie, and at the end of the movie, Lady Gaga does a love ballad. When was the last time you even heard a love ballad that was new? That's not a thing.
I think a lot of you used to get the obligatory romance in certain movies, and I don't mind that that's fading away because sometimes it was such a sort of a sop to throw at us. But also, what's wrong with The Boy Meets Girl? There should be plenty of room for a Bros or Bottoms or all these kind of crazy movies. But the mainstream audience wants to see mainstream stories, and I think there's almost like Hollywood can be embarrassed by that.
And a lack of cynicism. There was no cynicism in that movie to turn people off. Now, maybe that's projection on my point, because I'm sick of the cynicism and the snark for things that human beings traditionally care about, like romance, like falling in love, like being, or even like in that movie, it's about him. It's about Father Time coming for somebody who's fallen, who's aging out of something he loves to do. Those are all very simplistic ideas, and they have no desire in Hollywood to convey those because it doesn't fit with the narrative of the industry now.
I thought it was so funny when Top Gun Maverick just exploded and everyone loved it, and critics liked it, audiences liked it. It made $1 gazillion. I'm thinking, oh, they're going to make there's going to be like 6 copycats of that movie. They're going to just clone it. They're going to copy it. They're going to figure out what worked. They're going to give it a try, and maybe they'll all stink, but you're going to see that. I don't see any of that. I don't think they learned the lessons of the movie at all.
Nope.
No, they did. They did not.
That's unfortunate. That's why we need more creatives to get into the space and to start making independent content, because we're kind of at a point now where Hollywood. I mean, there's the strikes going on, and then just as a whole, they're bleeding in so many projects. I mean, now is the time, honestly, for independent people to really make their splash. You've got Angel Studios, you've got Daily Wire and Bent Key, now their new children's venture, and you've got The Blaze. You've got so many great companies that are kind of beginning to tame the new frontier. I mean, as a whole, even just crowdfunding. We just need good people. So Brett, get on it. Start writing out a plot and report back to us as soon as you've got your blockbuster. Well, actually, no. The other day I did pitch a movie where it's just called Guy Boss, and it's just every trope of a girl boss movie, except for it's just a guy, and you never acknowledge that it's a guy. I'd be okay with being a satire there.
I love that.
And Christian, you're right that they're not going to learn. And I'll tell you why, because Barbie made $1 gazillion at the box office as well, because it was a movie made by a woman about a character that women and girls have always loved, with themes for women. And the lesson the studios took from that was make movies about toys, which is not why it succeeded, right?
You're so right.
The reason why cares about superhero movies with women in them is because they're superhero movies. They're for men. So you're shoehorning female characters and female storylines into a traditionally male space. But they're not going to learn that because they're not. It's the same with the Taylor Swift movie. Made $100 million in its opening weekend because girls could go to the theater and do stuff that girls like to do together. Instead, you're going to get a bunch of male characters rewritten for women that will resonate with absolutely no one.
Well said. Shane H. Wilder in the chat said, during COVID, my dad told me that he went out to get a jug of water and some dude complained they took the last one. So my dad gave it to him and said, here, I don't like to see a grown man cry. No. And he said he also had me later in life. So he was part of the silent generation. So honestly, Shane, you are lucky to have access to someone from the silent generation. And
also,
Rhaegar,
to be fair, aren't the boomers going to get blamed for like Gen Alpha, even though Gen X is technically probably the ones having, because we always blame the boomers, right? We don't blame any other generation. We use boomer as like kind of a catch-all term for old person. So Gen Alpha is going to do something crazy, and somebody's going to be like, oh, these kids that the boomers just raised horribly. Like, no, wouldn't that be the children of the Gen Xers now?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, only time will tell. We'll see who the blame really ends up falling on. We'll see when the musical chairs is done, who's left with the bag. Rhaegar said, now we are going to have a Mattel cinematic universe.
Yep, that's the thing.
There we go. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you joining the stream tonight. It was a whole lot of fun. I'm going to go ahead and have us go around the circle and let you guys shout out any projects you're working on and where people can follow you. So, Brett, where can people go to keep up with everything you're doing?
Yes, guys, if you want to follow me personally, you can follow me on Instagram and Twix at Brett Dasovic on both of those platforms. But what you should do is you should come and check out Pop Culture Crisis. We are live 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. That's Eastern Standard Time, noon Pacific. Me and Mary have a lot of fun. We talk about pop culture, movies, all things Hollywood. So you should come and check it out.
Awesome. Christian, where can people find you?
My podcast is the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Comes out on Wednesdays, but I've got a lot of bonus episodes coming out on the weekend. So extra content. We celebrate free speech. We talk to artists who've been canceled, and we give voice to people who don't often have a voice when it comes to pop culture. And also you can follow me on Twitter or X, the formerly known as Twitter. That's at Hollywood in Toto.
Awesome. Anastasia?
Well, you can watch me on the Steve Deace Show twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then you can follow me on Twitter. I'm not calling it X. On Twitter, Anastasia_Hibbs. Even though I don't tweet as much as I usually do, because I've realized that looking at the real world and enjoying the real world is so much better than spending your whole entire life tweeting. So I don't tweet as much as I used to, but when it is important, when I find it important, I do.
Amen to that. Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us. Be sure to continue to follow us every Monday night. We are live, 8 p.m. Central Time. We take your chats. It is free. Feel free to join us. And then I am actually going to be doing some interviews, kind of some standalone content that will be coming out soon as well. So be sure to keep on the lookout for that. I did actually have one that the file corrupted, so I'm going to have to figure that out. So that's a big bummer. But either way, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time.